Hi, welcome to Lights Camera Author. I'm Jim Juno, and this is where we talk with authors who write books about classic Hollywood and entertainment. And Mabel Normand may not be remembered by many people today, but back in the early 19 teens, she was the biggest comedy female in the world. She was instrumental with having Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle come onto the scene, and also was the first woman to own her own studio. And I have with me now an author named Sean Crose. Hope I pronounced that right.
Sure did.
Yeah. And his new book is called Catholic Girl: The Life and Times of Mabel Normand. Sean, welcome to Lights Camera Author.
I am really honored to be here. This is a great podcast and it's a real thrill for me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Now, Mabel Normand, this was a woman who was a trailblazer in every respect of the word. And I would say she probably had more bad luck than anybody I've involved in movies. Some of it was her doing, some of it was
Yes.
beyond her control.
Mhm.
But still, I mean, she was. Well, first off, let me ask you how you got interested in Mabel Normand.
You're probably not going to believe this. I got interested in Mabel Normand because I was interested in Charlie Chaplin. And I was planning to write about Chaplin. I was doing a lot of research, and I obviously Mabel Normand comes up. And lo and behold, I ended up becoming more fascinated with her than Chaplin. And she became my point of interest. And after that, it really slowly, I would say, snowballed into an outright obsession. And the next thing you know, there we were. I reached out to her estate, and they were very gracious. And it was suggested. I think they thought I was planning on writing a biography on her, which I wasn't. I was just writing about her, maybe a short piece on her. And they had recommended, well, maybe you'd be interested in her religious background, which she was always a part of her life, even when she was, shall we say, behaving in a less than socially acceptable manner. She always
Yeah.
took it seriously. I said, well, that's a great title. That's where Catholic Girl comes from. And I took it from there. And like you, I just, the more I read, the more fascinated I got. And I like, why isn't this woman more well known than she is?
I
And
mean,
so
yeah,
I ended up feeling like a man on a mission. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to
that's
interrupt you.
okay. No, go ahead. Yeah. See, that's the great thing about Mabel Normand is that, I mean, yes, she is basically forgotten about today,
Hmm.
or if she is remembered at all, it's because of supposed unproven
Mm-hmm.
drug use.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was the biggest thing. The first time I had ever heard of her, obviously it started off with Chaplin and all that, but what's the first thing, or what, maybe not technically, but right down the line, boom, drug addict. I will tell you, I really did my homework in this because I said to myself, there comes a point where I don't want her to be a drug addict, but if she is, I have a responsibility as a writer to put it out there. Good, bad, and ugly, it's got to show up. And I couldn't find anything on drugs. Definitely, she was an alcoholic, but as far as illicit drugs, I will tell you, I searched high and low, and I found not one lick of solid evidence that she did hard drugs. And like I have said, if somebody finds evidence of it, that's fine. But I found out who she would reach out to for booze. She had different bootleggers because this was the 1920s. I found out who she would hear confession with, but I couldn't find out any drug. There was nothing. There was no there.
And I was looking at her at her biography too. And well, first off, like you said, she was raised a strict Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and she made it no bones about it. She goes, "I'm no saint."
No, yeah, she was very open about it.
Yes, and
She's a very human.
in a time when women weren't even allowed to vote,
Mm-hmm.
she was making 1,000 in 1914. I want to say $1914. She
Yeah,
was making $1,000 a week.
it's amazing. And if you throughout the writing process and the research process, I kept checking on that. How much is that in today's money? How much is that
Mhm.
in today's money? You end up being flabbergasted. And
It's got to
here's
be.
a girl that didn't go to school and was pretty much discovered, in a sweatshop in Brooklyn. Um, and now there she made more than Woodrow Wilson. It's just, you think about it, it just blows your mind.
And like you said, it's like she was making like $1,000 in 1914 money. I guess that would be close to about $100,000 today, maybe more.
Yeah, at least I believe
Yeah.
at least. I mean, she was just making massive sums of money, and especially at the end when she ended up getting that contract, it just really she did very well for herself. I'll certainly put it that way. And ironically enough, she didn't she didn't she didn't die poor, even with the drinking, even though she hadn't been acting much, even with tuberculosis, which killed her. She had to pay for her own bed. She still, I believe, I read a couple of yeah, probably a couple 100,000 in the bank when she was done to give to her mother or whatever charity she had given to. So she, back then, and that was early 1930 during the Depression. So it probably would have been even more had the stock market not crashed. So whatever you could say, she certainly knew how to handle what she bought in.
Like I said, we talked about the trailblazing part of it.
Mm.
A lot of people don't realize this is that she was the first woman to get hit in the face with a pie.
That is,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, please go on. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. She was the first woman to throw a pie in somebody's face. Um, was it Sterling, I believe, is who
They
it was?
say the word is that it started at, and it's I think is it Zuzu the band leader, was it? And Sterling was being on stage playing Ford Sterling, and the crowd's throwing things at him, and he decided to throw a pie at them, and he whacked Mabel and Fatty Arbuckle, who were a couple sitting in the audience, and then it broke out, and Mabel, they all chaos ensues, which they always do in those movies.
Yeah.
And she had said too, I believe she said that she had done it before then, and I haven't seen, it's probably a missing film with Charlie Chase. I believe she said that she
But
threw a pie at. So I could be wrong, but I believe she said, again, there's no record of it. But yeah, it may have been Charlie Chase. She said that she had actually thrown the pie at.
and she was the biggest star. She was bigger than Charlie Chaplin because
Oh,
she
very
was on the
much so.
scene. Yeah, she was on the scene before Chaplin came on board.
She really was. And she was definitely, as far as female comedians go, the big, for lack of a better term, the big dog in Hollywood. I would say she was Mary Pickford's equal, give or take one or another. And, they were close. They were
Right.
friends, very tight. And there was no competition, it seems, between them, which was very interesting. But they were neck and neck on who was the more famous and beloved comedian at the time. Charlie Chaplin didn't come in until 1914, a little bit later.
Right. And she was she instrumental in I believe it was Keystone signing Chaplin?
Yes, she was very much a part of it. She was engaged to Max Sennett, who
Senate.
ran Keystone, and she very much, offered support, guidance. She was a mentor to him. She was younger than he was, and she was a mentor to him, and obviously started out being a director and co-star. Chaplin did not handle that well, I must say. Being Chaplin, he was a pallbearer at her funeral. There is some evidence, I wasn't able to confirm it, that he did really reach out when she was going through some very hard times and spoke up on her behalf. But he's a man of his time and place, and we all have our flaws. And Charlie Chaplin had a real problem having a young, attractive woman tell him what to do. Also, he had put the moves on her once, and she wasn't having it. So there might have been that bitterness in there too.
And I guess the movie Chaplin got that right with that scene where he sprays her with a water hose or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, that scene, because she didn't want him to spray with the water hose because she said they were running with time, that they were running out of time. He kind of threw a tantrum, and the people on the set were quite angry about it. Um, According to his biography, he got his way. There's not much outside of his biography. Other reports don't have that saying being said. So it's hard to imagine. The movie Chaplin is rather pro Chaplin, which, okay, fine. But apparently Mabel was very, very easygoing as a director. She's very
Wow.
hardworking. She was very easygoing. And what I've heard, and of course we're not there, so we don't know. From what we heard, that she that had been used for a long time. They didn't want a chance to use it. One of those things that's kind of lost to history. We don't know for sure. Um, my guess would be that he kind of threw a tantrum. They let it go. She was good with actors. Mac wasn't quite as charming. Her, who the studio head producer and obviously boss of both Chaplin and Mabel. But it sounds like it was just kind of something that went over quickly and was swept under the rug, and that Chaplin tried to make a bigger deal of after in his autobiography. Again, I'm not bashing Chaplin, but with the evidence that we have, that's Seems to
some
be what it looked like.
some literary license taken,
Exactly, exactly.
Now now I want to don't want to dwell on this too much, but
No, please.
I never saw a person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time so many times.
On it's unreal. She
Fatty Arbuckle. I
Fatty
mean, this
Arbuckle
was
was her partner
yes.
in many, many movies. And he had just signed, they weren't even working together when everything went down. They had just signed a deal. He had just signed $1 million deal. I think he had signed a bigger contract than Chaplin. If the whole Virginia Rap or Rapay incident didn't happen, who knows how it would have turned out. But yeah, he ended up getting charged with rape and murder, which during, again, with the research, I was very stunned to find out that the girl, her name was Virginia Rapay or Virginia Rape, had been asked before she died. I guess she was cognizant, listen, the last person you were seen with was Arbuckle, what happened? And her response was nothing like that. Very almost brush off. She goes, no, 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 it wasn't like that. It was abdominal. Something was very wrong abdominally, but it wasn't Arbuckle.
Right. It was her mother who was pushing that. From what I
Yes,
read.
yes, yes, exactly. There, it was being pushed. She had a friend of hers, and I wish I could recall the name right now, that really wanted to cash in on the whole
Mhm.
thing. And there was the prosecuting attorney, of course, wanted to make his name, and it turned into a fiasco.
And then she hooks up with, well, I don't want to say hooks up with, but becomes real good friends with William Desmond Taylor, the director.
The director, William Desmond Taylor, indeed. And
Last person to see him alive.
she stopped at his house that night, and she gave him a book. He gave her a book, and she talked to him for a little bit, and she left. She had a chauffeur-driven limo, so she left. She drove out, and the next thing she found out, she was woke up the next morning and had been told he was murdered. Somebody who was a neighbor saw a strange-looking person walk out of the house. They never found out who it was, but she ended up being cleared pretty quickly. She was obviously at home when it happened. People are in. It was a complex, a very well-to-do complex, but a complex. People saw who was coming and going, so it was easy to dismiss her as one of the suspects. But the media, that's where everything really went downhill. They were having an affair. He was trying to get her off drugs. That was the big thing. She was a wild child. And there were basically two reporters from Hearst that really pushed it. Others pushed it too. But my humble opinion is that, listen, we got Arbuckle now. We got another one. Let's reel them all in when we can. They thought they had their other target. And to a large degree, they did. But there wasn't enough to get Mabel to, like they got Arbuckle. There's no way you could put her on trial. There were just too many people, When they said they heard the gunshot was not the same time that her maid said she was in the house having dinner, so nothing was corroborating as far as that goes. But they could get her on the drug charges, and because they don't need to prove it. Even though she wasn't doing drugs, there's no evidence she was doing illegal drugs. They still got her on it in the public eye, at least to a large degree. And it's a shame. And one caveat, I think in order to be fair, you have to say a lot of people, well, it was Hearst. A lot of Hearst newspapers defended her. So I say in the book that Hearst had an unwieldy empire under him, of which he was not always in control of. And I think this was a case of that. But she definitely, that was the first time. And then, of course, later on, her chauffeur shot at a New Year's party, shot another friend of hers, Cortland Dines, who appears to have been engaged to Edna Purviance. I'm probably mangling the name. Charlie Chaplin's old girlfriend. Purviance, yes. And of course, listen, he shot her with Mabel's gun. Now, again, he got it. He went into her drawers and got it. He ended up being an escapee from an Oakland chain gang, believe it or not. A real wacko. I hate to say it for lack of a better term. But that really, again, that really hurt her. She was at a party where there was booze during Prohibition, so then the drug rumors kick in, and you could say, and I get it, Mabel wasn't a saint. She certainly could party with the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you could put an argument that, Mabel, what are you doing? You know what I mean? She had an appendix operation a few days later. What are you doing at a party with alcohol? But on the other hand, you do have to pity her, because it just confirmed in the minds of some what they had already said, and people wouldn't show her movies, which were innocuous, and all that sort of thing. And believe it or not, that's sort of what's driven me throughout this process is I think of the line, not to be pretentious, but the line from King Lear, I am more sinned against than sinning. Yes, okay, Mabel was an alcoholic. Yes, she was a bit of eccentric. Maybe she could take pranks too far. She could joke too much. A murdering drug addict, she was not. You know what I mean? And in fact, in the research, which I found really fascinating, she supported, now it seems like a defense argument, but she supported a lot of orphanages. She gave a ton to charity, and I don't just mean in a one-time flashy thing. She really supported a bunch for Italian orphans after World War One. She did a lot of work with that,
And she kept it
and
all secret too.
thank you, she never told anybody, even at her worst moment where she had to show up at court and she was being smeared. She could have done PR, and she didn't. Because in her mind, your good deeds were supposed to, she's an old school Catholic. In her mind, you don't use your good deeds to boast, even if it's going to hurt you in court. And she stuck with it. And to me, that's the tell right there.
Yeah.
To me, that's the tell of a person right there. I don't care what your flaws are. If you're willing to go down without boasting about yourself or trying to give a false image of yourself, I got to give you a lot of credit. And yeah, they didn't find out till after all the money she had given.
Yeah, and the amazing thing also is that okay, I want to get to her because she died at a very, very young age.
Very young, yes.
Very young. But before we get there, I mean, even like 30 years after she died, 35 years after she died, Anita Luce
Yes.
in her book
Yes.
uh says that, oh, Mabel used to write me letters during her coke-filled frenzies and stuff like, you know,
Yeah.
with,
I don't know. I'm sorry.
and these, no, I mean, these are her peers.
Yeah.
These are fellow
Yeah.
actresses.
I don't know what that's about. And I know now Anita Luce, there's a lot of, well, where's the there? You know what I mean? There's a lot of that now, and there is none. Yeah, actually, in fact, they asked the police, that's on record, they asked Cortland Dines and everyone else after it was shot, were you her drug supplier? Do you know her with drugs? These are the people she, and they're like, no, there's nothing, And again, there's no there. I don't know what Anita Luce was thinking. I can only say I know what I've ascertained, and I haven't seen any of that. And in fact, the other biographies, except for maybe one or two, or memoirs ever, don't bring that up. She's one of the only ones, and I don't know why. And she didn't share where she got it from. So I have to say right now, she's the only person I've ever seen that's telling these stories of a personal level with the letters and whatnot.
And that shocked me, yeah.
So I don't know if it was a PR stunt. Maybe Anita was getting a little older. I don't want to bash her. I certainly didn't come up with anything that she was saying to verify what she was saying.
When you were researching her, what was the one thing that surprised you? That, I mean, or was there one thing that surprised you?
What she accomplished, because I came into agreeing, obviously, certainly surprised me. She ended up running her own studio before women could vote. She was one of the biggest stars absolutely in the world. But what surprised me is she had no background in entertainment. She was a Gibson girl for a little bit,
yes,
a model. You'd see her on Coca-Cola ads and whatnot, but they weren't ever named. And as she herself said, she kind of made comedy up herself for women. I know that sounds ridiculous in this day and age, but back then, women who were comedians were generally going to be either eye candy for a bunch of guys who walk off the screen, or they're going to be physically, I hate to say this, but they're physically homely. You would make fun of their looks. You would laugh at them because they were fat or they were too skinny or this or that. And Mabel was a good looking girl. And she just, and nope, we're gonna do it this way. And she would do things. This is what shocked me, that no one did at the time. It would be even hard today. She did a movie with Sterling, of course, with her early ones, called A Muddy Romance, and she's literally letting herself be dragged through the mud. Unheard of stuff at that time. She flew in an airplane in one of her movies. She climbed down from a hot air balloon. These are things she really did. And what made her stand out is she was unafraid to take risks, but she was also unafraid to be comedic in the way the guys were. She was willing to be off the wall. And back then that just wasn't supposed to be. And she was willing to do that. And that's what really struck me, is that she was really an influencer that we had never heard of. She's not just an old celebrity who people forgot about and was treated unfairly. She was somebody who's, if there'd be no Lucille Ball, Carol Burnett, Kristen Wiig, if you want to do modern, any Gilda Radner, I mean, their spiritual guide of comedy was Mabel Normand. She was the one to do the wacky role, and she did it well. And not to get long winded,
Oh, that's
also
great.
there was a degree of subtlety to her performances. You would see her. I'm just thinking right now of a Muddy Romance, but she's our Freddie Arbuckle's wife, and why her name is escaping me right now after I've written a ton about her. But of course, right now, nervous on a podcast. But she had they were close friends, and she played her mother in a movie. And in that movie, in a Muddy Romance, you'll notice that Mabel pretends she's nervous, and at one point, she very subtly is tugging at her mother's dress. Or if you look at a big hit she had with Marie Dressler and Chaplin called Tilly's Punctured Romance, was the first feature length comedy. She's almost doing things, and not to blow it out of proportion, but she's almost doing strangely Brando-esque things. When like Chaplin's doing his Chaplin thing, she'll scratch her nose, she'll rub her face, she'll look around, she'll scratch her arm. She's doing very naturalistic things, which you don't see a lot, which you don't see a lot in that era. And I don't want to make false claims. Mabel was the first one to act wacky. Mabel was the first one to always, to scratch her nose if she's showing that her character's nervous on screen. But I think it's pretty safe to say she's the first one at that level of fame.
See, and
That
that's what struck me also is that, like you said, she did her own stunts
Yeah,
during a time. I mean, first off, women did not do stuff
no,
in the early teens. I mean,
they just
you
didn't.
know, I mean, even in private lives, it was supposed to be, heard, a seen but not heard,
Yes,
and sort of like Republicans today. But anyway, the thing, the thing is that she did her own stunts.
yeah,
She wrote movies, and she was also a very shrewd public relations person when it
brilliant.
came when Mickey ran over budget or over time. What does she do? She goes out and starts publicizing it that it's coming. Wait,
It's
wait for Mickey.
for
That
years,
was
for years, because
yeah,
it had been held for a year, 2 years. It had been held for a while, and she went out there and she did push it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because she really threw it out there, almost very modern, like online. We're hearing online rumors that well, I wouldn't say Val Kilmer did that. Brad Pitt is about to start with Austin Butler in a movie, but it was those kind of whispers that she was putting out there. They would name the project and then they wouldn't, and she was going to direct it, and that's why I know we've been hearing from her for a while. And she really gave that sense of anticipation. So when it did come out, boom, and that was actually another thing that shocked me, is how big Mickey was. It was arguably the most successful grossing film until I think Snow White in 1938. I mean, it was really the first blockbuster. I would argue it was the first true blockbuster by today's standards, what we would view as a blockbuster. And it was everywhere. There were Mickey tires, there were, Mickey toothbrushes, there were Mickey everything. I mean, just it was the only thing I could compare it to, maybe, is if, and this movie obviously isn't a comedy, but it would be at like a Titanic or an Avatar level, Star Wars original level popularity. And it amazes me that a movie was so quickly over the decades vanished.
yeah.
Because it really was. It was more popular than anything Chaplin did. I would argue even Mary Pickford did at the time. I mean, it was really massive. And yeah, it's just strange how it just kind of went away.
And I hope that she was a shrewd businesswoman, and so
Yes.
I
Oh
hope
yes.
she got paid, I imagine, for all these
No,
endorsements.
well, she was a shrewd businesswoman, but Max Sennett, her fiance, was not a particularly loyal guy, judging from the evidence. He told her before the movie left that it was going to flop, and he gave her $25,000, which even today I'd take the $25,000, but in those days, who knows how much. But it looks like he knew he had a hit on his hands, and he didn't want to give her the percentages. She would have made. She even said, she goes, "I made a lot of millionaires with this movie," but she didn't really get all that much.
So that's sad.
In the context of her time, yeah, she really got hosed with that. And again, she had plenty of money, but it's not that she wasn't getting the money that she was earning. And she definitely got. It looks like she got scammed. It really does.
That's sad.
It
Yeah,
really does.
and then the end of her life. I mean, she suffered from
Terrible,
tuberculosis. I mean, a
terrible.
horrible, horrible way to go. I mean, she fought it for 2 years, I believe,
Yeah, she
maybe
had
more.
it as a youngster. Her brother had died from it, and obviously, it was in remission, or she was allowed. Back then, they would quarantine you. So back then, if it had reached a certain degree, so she was okay to act. But they even said on Mickey, she started getting sick. I think she denied it to herself for a long time,
Mm.
and then finally, the last several years, she was in Pottinger Sanitarium, and she died. It was just a losing fight, and her estate was very kind. Her nephew was very kind and explained in detail, from family members, whatnot, her last day, and
Wow.
she had received, she had gone to mass, she had gotten last rites. I mean, she was sitting down, she received communion, and I think they said she lost conscious about 5:30 in the morning, and then at 2:30 in the morning on the 23rd of February 1930, she died. She lost consciousness, and she had died hours later.
Is it true that she wanted to die at home, but they couldn't move her, but they got a screen from her house and put it around her bed so that she thought she was home.
You know what? If that is true, I did not see that, but I am willing to. I will always admit that if I hadn't gotten that evidence, I hadn't seen that, but I am certainly willing to look into it for if there's a second edition. That would be something they would do. She had some her nurse was very loyal. Her husband, even though their marriage was a farce, I have to tell you, the guy was there when it counted. He was, he was there for her.
Lou Cody, yeah.
Yeah, and again, even if the marriage, was a farce, and it was. They voted one night,
Yeah,
and
they got drunk and got
got a
married.
police escort up to somewhere in the California hills, and they got a guy to marry him, and it was all regret after that. But
They woke
in
up and said,
fact,
"What did we do?"
yeah, oh yeah, pretty much so. And he wasn't doing that well either. He was a very bad alcoholic.
Yeah.
And though I give him credit, she wasn't going to get a Catholic funeral because she got married outside the church, well wasted, and they were just afraid that neither of them had the energy to deal with the publicity of a divorce. But and it had to be very awkward for a guy who, up until Mabel came around, was known as kind of what they call a player today, or a
Yeah.
ladies' man. And he came up clean, and he just told the church, he goes, "Listen, we never even consummated this marriage." And the church, obviously, then it doesn't count because it was
Right.
a farce, and therefore she ended up being buried. But
But she married under her married name,
she
Mabel
did. They
Norman
had to
Cody.
legally. They had to legally.
Oh,
She was still
legal.
married, so it was a legality that they had to keep the name Cody. And he only took, because of legalities, he only accepted $1 of her money. He probably
Oh,
gave it back. Now she had the right to it anyways, but he never fought for it. He, number one, he was doing okay, but number two, he never wanted a bit of her money. He got $1 to just legalize, to make sure it's all clean. So out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, he got one, and that was just so nobody could ever say, or somehow legally try to tamper or use some legal means to tax him or anything like that. So
amazing.
yeah,
Well, the book is Catholic Girl: The Life and Times of Mabel Normand.
the life and times of Mabel Normand. Yes, really, I just she impresses me so much. And again, like the rest of us, there's weaknesses, but like again, I probably said earlier, more sinned against than sinning as far as reputation goes by far. And she's funny,
She
and I
is.
think that's the main thing. Out of anything else, she's really funny. So I
Well,
certainly
Sean, well, Sean Crose is the author. Sean, I want to thank you again for being on Light the Camera Author tonight.
I can't thank you enough. This has been great, and it has really been a pleasure. Thank you, and this is a great podcast. And
Thank you.
oh, it's really interesting. I mean, you really cover the bases. I mean, whether it's Mabel Normand or we're talking Star Trek or any million of things, you are a veritable library of knowledge when it comes to this. So I'm a little
Oh,
envious, but
thank
I
you.
can't thank you enough. It's been a real pleasure.